Hey mamas, and welcome to the Entering Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Marie Bilger, a wife, mom of two, VBAC mama, and doula. Join us every episode to learn from professionals, special guests, and moms just like you, ensuring that you know what you need to know and discover things that you didn't know before. I believe in you. Let's doula this, and let's navigate the transition of entering motherhood together. Hey mamas, and welcome to another episode of Entering Motherhood. In this episode, we talk with Emma Pattee, who is a climate journalist, a mother of two, and the author of the novel Tilt. Emma shares her journey into motherhood, including her struggles with prenatal depression and the emotional and spiritual challenges of pregnancy. Her experiences with both home and hospital births really play into this interview as well. And in this conversation, she explores societal expectations around pregnancy, the intersection of motherhood and climate anxiety, and how these themes influenced Emma's novel, which is about a pregnant woman who is facing a natural disaster and how the inspiration came from a real life experience that she was having. Emma emphasizes the raw, transformative nature of motherhood and the importance of authentic support. I know that you're going to love this episode. There is so much here. So with that, let's get this episode started. Hello, and welcome to Entering Motherhood. Super excited and happy to have you here today. So how about you go ahead and get started and introduce yourself for the listeners?
Yeah, hi, I'm excited to be here. I'm Emma Pattee. I'm a climate journalist. I am the mother of two kids, and I also have a novel called Tilt.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your entrance into motherhood and what that journey was like, and kind of give us a little bit of an insight on what things were going on in your life at that time.
Yeah, I had always wanted to become a mom. When I was a kid, I had read somewhere that economically women do the best when they get married at 25 and men have kids at 27, and it allows them to, then in their peak earning years to have kids that are, in school. And I was, very young. I was probably 9 or 10 when I read this. And I was like, okay, that's the plan. That'll be the plan. So I got married at 25. And, then 27 rolled around and I wasn't, we didn't have kids. And so we started talking about it. And yeah, I ended up getting pregnant when I was 28.
So you had always known you wanted kids. What was kind of going on when you got pregnant? Like, was it, I guess, fairly quick then for you guys?
Yeah, I don't think that I understood then. I mean, I was a lot younger. I didn't really understand anything. I didn't have any friends who had kids. I didn't really understand anything about infertility, anything about, I don't even think I understood what ovulation was. And so we got pregnant really fast. We got pregnant the very first month. In hindsight, I think that was kind of the beginning of what ended up being a really challenging pregnancy, obviously for a lot of hormonal reasons. But I can see that psychologically, it was hard for me to get something very quickly. And that I think, I have a lot of friends who have struggled with fertility. And it's, of course, such a sort of an unthinkable thing to say, oh, it would have been better for me if it had been a little bit harder to get pregnant. Nobody who's had a hard time getting pregnant, obviously, would agree with that or feel that way. But I have met quite a few women who have gotten pregnant very quickly. And it seems like it can be a recipe for feeling overwhelmed and unprepared, for not really having time to process the emotional journey you're about to go on, for not maybe really even having time to process the choice. My husband and I definitely were sort of, well, we'll just try, we'll just see what happens. And I think people like that are maybe not always prepared to 2 weeks later be holding a positive pregnancy test. I certainly was not. Yeah, I was really, really shocked and unprepared.
Yeah. So how old are your kids now?
My kids are 2 and 5.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is, about 6 years ago. You're just
Mhm.
looking down like, oh my gosh, that happened so quickly. What were you doing at the time? Like, obviously you have your novel now, but what did that look like? And when did this, idea for the novel come to be?
Yeah, totally. So at the time, I was working as a journalist, and I had a lot of fear and anxiety about what was going to happen to my work once I had kids, and I can speak to that later because I don't want to just leave that floating. because that I was very disproven. That I was at the time, I was really sure that I would likely never work again, and certainly never have another accomplishment. What that created in me while I was pregnant was a kind of franticness around work. Always wanted to write a book. I had written books before, but never, gotten them past sort of the first draft stage. I, had always wanted to be a writer. That's what I went to school for. And I think had this sort of feeling of, this is my last chance to write a book. But my book really is about a pregnant woman who is grappling with this idea that this might be her last chance to follow her dreams. And so for me, it was almost a meta conversation where my dream became a conversation about what it means to want something that badly that it almost maybe becomes heavy or full of pressure.
So you kind of were having very similar feelings and struggles. And I feel like that tends to happen often. Like you pull from, your own experiences and other insights or things that are going on. And so obviously, like with your background and everything too, was that something that you had planned, or did it just kind of like come to you as an idea?
Yeah, it very much came as a bolt of inspiration. So to give some background, my novel is about a woman who is 9 months pregnant. She's shopping for a crib at IKEA when a massive earthquake hits Portland, Oregon. And that earthquake is a real earthquake. It's one that we've been waiting for here for a while. It's overdue here. And scientists and earthquake experts say that when it does hit Portland, it's going to be the worst natural disaster to ever hit North America in recorded history, obviously. And there was a really incredible article about it written in the New Yorker in 2015 by Catherine Schultz that won the Pulitzer. Highly recommend it. It's called The Big One. That idea, I was as you can guess, I was 9 months pregnant. I was at IKEA. I was shopping for a crib. I, at that point, had been dealing with pretty intense prenatal depression. And also I had gotten pretty obsessed about the earthquake. And I had a lot of fear about the earthquake happening when I was in labor, the earthquake happening with a newborn. I just had a lot of real intense late night scenarios that were going through my head. So I'm shopping for this crib and the building started to shake. And I thought, oh my God, it's the earthquake. In that couple seconds of shaking, I had this very intense, how am I going to get home? How am I going to survive? What would I do to survive? And the building stopped shaking. It was not the earthquake. It was, a big truck coming by with IKEA furniture in the back. And the novel at that point arrived pretty fully formed in my mind. It wasn't, I wasn't like, oh, I want to write a book. What should I write a book about? I left IKEA that day saying, I have this novel idea and it's a woman and she's at IKEA and she's going to walk home. Yeah, it was very much of a flash of inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it is always funny when people say, oh, you take it from your lived experiences, because I have had people ask me, oh, is it a memoir? And then I'm like, well, no, it's about someone trying to survive during a massive earthquake. But yes, it's of course, I think that, writers take a lot from their psyches. And I think that writers often tend to be people who are very intuitive to cultural pain, cultural experience. And so it's hard when someone's like, oh, you're taking something from your lived experience. It is true. And also there is psychically, I think, more of a communal experience that what I have noticed is that a lot of writers are much more tapped into. And I love that. To me, that is very meaningful and makes a lot of sense to me. It's my experience is that it's really about channeling a communal experience, because certainly the circumstances of my character are not circumstances that I have lived. She has her mother has died, her marriage is struggling, and she's very, economically disenfranchised. But at the time of being pregnant, it really felt like communal experiences.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting to really, highlight that and mention this earthquake is due and there is this potential for happening. You had that fear of it potentially going on. And I think not only when we're pregnant, but just in life, I think we do kind of envision sometimes these dreaded things happening or, occurrences going on, and it can, affect what we're doing. And so, like you said, that communal experience, I think people can relate to that sensation of thinking like this could happen or what if this does happen? And it really gets you thinking of what if scenarios and how would I handle it? And then we can put ourselves in that book and situation and say like, what would I do? I don't know what I would do. And it kind of like adds that thrill to it. What would you say are other things that you kind of were thinking about at the time, struggling with or having thoughts of as you were preparing to become a mom?
Something that is like a big theme in the book that was very present for me when I was pregnant was this idea that, first off, I write about climate change. And I was so sort of taken with the way that, like, it's very hard for people to prepare for climate change or to wrap their minds around it. We really struggle to imagine it. And yet we know it's coming. It's a reality. And I mean, it's not this, it's already here. The climate crisis is very much here, and it is going to get worse and worse and worse. And so you can look at the scientific facts of that, but it is still incredibly hard to even know what to do to prepare. And in some ways, I think having a kid is like that, And then there's so much in anticipation of something you really can't even imagine. And I also was very disturbed by the focus on preparing through consumption. And I really started to see that being a pregnant woman is actually kind of like it's a consumer identity. And people talk about what you're going to buy and how you're going to decorate and if you bought all the things. And it's so much about buying and shopping. And that's what we consider preparing for baby. And there's so little about what I would consider actually preparing to have a child, which I think is much more about dealing with a lot of unsaid things in your relationship, which is about dealing with your own childhood trauma. And I think also about finding some kind of the spiritual understanding of what it means to bring life into this world, and that, of course, is very much a look at life and death. It is, I don't know how people go through birth without being really intimately aware of death, because it's like, you know what I mean? It's like you want only one. You want only one side of a two-sided bargain, that there's life and then there's death. And so when I was pregnant, I was very sort of shocked by how little actual preparation people seem to do to have children, and yet how much sort of capitalist preparation. And so the book is, really does kind of examine that in some ways.
Yeah. How did you spiritually, emotionally prepare during your pregnancies?
I think my first one, like I said, I had really severe prenatal depression. Prenatal depression is like it's fairly common, but it's really not spoken about. And I wrote an article about it for Vogue, which I'm happy to share with you. When I have spoken with people who have actually had it, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, being pregnant is hard. Sure, you're depressed. And I would say it's not quite like that. It's not quite like, oh, I'm really tired and my back hurts. This sucks. It's more like wanting to die. It's like you don't want to live. You are so miserable. And it's not because you're pregnant. It's not related to like a physical specific. For me, it was like I just woke up one day and I really could not even remember what joy was. Couldn't remember a single thing I'd ever enjoyed. I felt very confused about why I was alive. I just felt like I was living in like complete blackness, and like every day moving forward would just be blackness and darkness. And it was really, really terrifying. I didn't understand. I had never heard of prenatal depression, so I didn't really know to flag anybody when you talk about it. Like, I'm feeling kind of down. Everyone's like, yeah, being pregnant's so hard. Super hard to be pregnant. And so I was like, oh yeah, okay. But like, that's totally normal. Everyone feels that way. And I was like, okay. And I knew something was wrong. I would be like driving and I would start to think like, what would happen if I just drove into the median? Like I knew, but I became really scared that if I started to vocalize this stuff, that people would think I didn't want to have a kid. And it was so confusing because everybody who knew me knew that all I wanted was to have a kid. So nobody really would have like believed, it would have been crazy. And it scared me about me. What kind of a person wants a kid and then doesn't want to have a kid when they're pregnant? And so I don't know that I did I don't think I did any spiritual reckoning. I mean, yes, of course I did. So you do so much spiritual reckoning when you're depressed. It just doesn't feel good. It's just, you're just trying to survive. I was trying so hard to survive and to grip my way through it. And eventually I did start talking to a friend. I did start talking to my partner. I did talk to my therapist. But at that point I was like 7 months pregnant, and I didn't want to go on to medication. I don't know that I would have ever wanted to, but I certainly didn't want to do it that late in pregnancy. It just didn't make sense. And my first pregnancy was really just an endurance test of survival.
Yeah. And then how did that trickle into once baby was there? Like, did you feel immediately different? Did it take a while to kind of come out of that? Or what were you dealing with after baby was here?
Yeah, my experience, and I have heard from dozens of women that have had the same experience, but I know that it's not true for everyone, is that within hours of having both of my children, it cleared up. I mean, almost bizarrely, I would sort of be like giddy laughing, like, I'm me again. I'm myself. Oh my God. And just like, I love so much about life, that kind of reminder, like, oh my gosh. And so I had pretty euphoric postpartum periods with both of my kids, I would say. My second, obviously, it's just different. We have two kids. But I had with my first, I had truly like a sort of giddy euphoric postpartum period, just so incredibly grateful to not be depressed. Yeah, and it gave me so much respect for people that I don't know that I truly understood what actual diagnosed depression feels like, and that it's not really about having like a bad day or like a bad thing happen. And it just gave me an incredible amount of compassion for people living with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then how did you prepare for your second? Did you do anything differently?
My second was an accident. We were using those apps that track those tracking apps. And it turns I still have not quite gotten to the bottom of this. I'm a science journalist, so I was really fascinated by this. And I at one point, was trying to sort of drill down and talk to an OBGYN, but it seems like the day that I got pregnant, there was a less than 1% chance of getting pregnant on that day. Like it was a day that the app would have said, you are safe. So yeah, my second kiddo was an accident. And again, I was totally unprepared, totally shocked. We had just decided that we were not in a position to have a second kid, like maybe 2 weeks before, which is why we were trying to really use this app and trying to be really like conscientious. And then I was pregnant. And I would say the second time around, I knew that I was going to get depressed. And when I did, I was like, oh, damn, it really validated for me how awful it was the first time around. Because I had thought, maybe I'm misremembering, maybe I'm exaggerating. And it was like, oh, here it comes. And I pretty much got into bed for like a few months and didn't get out, kind of a thing. I mean, I was obviously with my kid and taking my kid to school, and I was working. But when I was about maybe 6 weeks pregnant, I had a woman reach out, and she was a literary agent. She had read the first part of my book, and she offered to be my agent. And so it was a really strange time because it was a lot of pressure and urgency in a different way. The first pregnancy was this feeling of like, I'm going to miss out on my career if I don't, I was sort of in a panic. And the second also was a feeling of I'm going to miss out if I don't grab this opportunity, but the opportunity was more tangible. And so at that point, I ended up rewriting my whole book during my second trimester of pregnancy. And she actually sent me notes on the book like as I was going into labor. So it was a very, I really worked like a dog throughout that pregnancy, which was funny because the promise I'd made to myself was if I ever get pregnant again, I am going to rest and pamper myself. You cannot even imagine the amount of pampering and leisure and rest I'm going to give myself. And then here I am with a 2-year-old trying to rewrite a book while working. So I love talking to people about their second pregnancies because it's like all the all the confusion of the first time, I think for me at least, was gone. And the fear was gone. I could really experience it because I wasn't so kind of shocked and disoriented. And I just so appreciate, and that was certainly my experience with the births. Yeah. Like what a gift to experience something a second time.
How were your births with both of them?
For both kids, I had pretty high drama births in different ways. I come from a home birth background. And I guess by that, I mean, I was born at home. My mom was very involved with normalizing and legalizing VBAC in California in the 90s. And so I come from a community of a lot of activism around home birth and a lot of activism around women's medical choice in birth. And that is normal to me. And it's funny. And I remember being in college in some sort of like feminist literature class, and somebody brought up home birth. And I said, oh, I was born at home. And another girl said, what? They don't have hospitals in Oregon. And it was sort of my first introduction. I had kind of thought like, all fairly liberal people are like down with a little home birth. And it was really my first introduction to that more East Coast traditional type of liberal that is very unfamiliar with home birth. I have a very political feeling about home birth. I don't in any way think people should have to have home births or not, or that home birth is better than hospital birth. And my experience, was a pretty scary home birth. But I think that if you cannot engage with the concept of home birth, you really are not fit to be engaging with the conversation around women's rights and women's medical rights and medical freedom. And so I think that like if you can't really grasp the idea that we cannot put our medical freedom and our safety in the hands of the completely male medical establishment that has been very proven to like not have our backs, if you can't even engage in that conversation, I have some questions. But I also understand that when people come face to face with the concept of home birth, it's often when they're pregnant and they're scared. And I get that. I have a lot of compassion for that. Like, it's maybe not the time to understand the political dynamics of it, but I am a staunch advocate, for the discussion of home birth. I would not say I'm a staunch advocate for home birth. I don't advocate for anything except that women are listened to and feel safe and feel respected and that the science supports what their doctors are telling them. But I'm dogmatic about that. So yeah, with my first kiddo, I opted to have a home birth, and then I got risked out of it. My water broke. I wasn't in labor, and I had a doula. I had sort of taken all the classes and done all the things. And my midwife came to the house, and she said, at this point there was meconium in my water, and when my water broke. And she said, at this point, our recommendation would be that you go to the hospital. And I said, okay, what are my other options? Because that's what I thought I was supposed to say. And she was like totally confused by the question. She's like, well, I guess you could try to have the kid alone at your house. I don't think like any other midwife in the city is going to come to your home at 42 weeks pregnant with your water broken with meconium, but like, I don't know. And I was like, oh, I get it. You're telling me there are no other options. Like you're framing this as a recommendation, but like we're going to the hospital. And so it's just sort of this like funny moment where like I really tried to be my own advocate in a moment that I did not understand. Was sort of, I was at the end of the road there. So I went to the hospital. I was raised a real serious hippie. I had never really been in a hospital before. I'd never been a patient at a hospital before. And so I was terrified. I had a lot of fear of hospitals. And, my husband dropped me off at the front. I had my little backpack. I felt like a kid on the first day of school, wandering the halls. And I got checked in, and every horror story that I had heard as a little kid from all these real pro home birth activists and all these midwives was going through my head. And I was like, I'm going to die here. I'm going to die here. And I got checked in, and the nurse came in to get me settled. And she said, I had a bunch of home births, and we're going to do everything we can to make this room feel like it's your home. And she said, like, don't worry, you'll have the next one at home. And it was really beautiful. It was a really, really beautiful experience. I had a really unusual situation where my midwife was credentialed at the local hospital. She was half-time worked as an OBGYN there. And so she just drove in from her house, clocked in, and ended up delivered my baby, not in my home, but just at the hospital. It was this really unique arrangement that she had. She had told me when I had first been interviewing midwives, she had said, I want you to understand that my first priority is that you have vaginal birth. And my second is that you have it at home. And I was like, okay. I had no clue what she was talking about. And after my birth, I was like, I understand exactly what you're talking about. And she did everything humanly possible to make sure I had a vaginal birth. And we were sort of in that like minutes away from C-section because of course it was cascading interventions, and I had a really high fever, and we were sort of minutes away. And I'd been pushing for like over 3 hours. And, I really had a moment that I think it is that I examine or touch on in the book. I really had this moment of like, oh, over my dead fucking body, am I having a C-section? And no shade on C-sections. I think if I had a third, I probably would have a C-section. I think I might be done with labor pain. But in that moment, I was like, oh, there is no way I have come this far. And I had kind of a hold my beer moment. And I felt this sort of feverish intensity of like, I'm getting this baby out. And he came out with the cord wrapped twice around his neck. And he came out, which was, I think, why he was he was getting really caught. And he came out and not responsive. And they had, it was sort of became this big emergency thing. It was meaningful to me in that moment to feel like I had somehow taken control in a moment. And I'm not saying I did. And I'm not trying to, who friggin' knows why that birth ended up the way it did and not a different way. But I have a lot of gratitude for the midwife that sort of held all doctors at bay and said, like, we're giving her more time, and I really have a lot of gratitude for that. Yeah, she came through on her promise to me. So,
yeah. Yeah. Because I mean, there are not many people that have that support in that way. And in other circumstances, it would be, maybe even hours beforehand. Like maybe if you were only pushing for an hour before you even got to the pushing stage, it could have very much been a different story. And I think it is one of those things like you do have to hold on to, what you want that to look like and how you said like over my dead body, like I am not having a cesarean, like whatever it might be, because there can be situations where you're just okay, like sure, this is the route that we're going, and
well,
you're just kind of listening to the team and the providers, and they're not giving you that space and the allotted time to succeed in having that vaginal birth. There's so much to like your birth story in general, and I love how you also said like you were standing there with your backpack and you were just like, I'm going to die here in this like fear of going into the hospital, and then having that like safe space and that nurse that was there to give you those words of encouragement to feel safe. Because again, like sometimes that's not the case. You can walk in and it's an immediate, oh, this is a home birth transfer. Look at this client that we're like with now. And it can be that
oh, totally. I mean, I had heard all the
pushback.
horror stories. My
Yeah.
mom lived that experience and it was traumatizing to her. And, you bring up such a good point. Thank you for saying this, that like, and this is why it frustrates me when people really can't even talk about home birth seriously, is that I don't think people understand how much policies change hospital to hospital and state to state. And so a lot of people are like, especially in Portland, people will be like, well, I had a great birth at the hospital. And it's like, yeah, but only because you lived in Portland. And if you lived in all these other places, your birth would not have ended that way. And you wouldn't have gotten like, people don't understand that even down to like the hours that you're allowed to be in labor from when your water breaks. And then I think also people take it, and I actually just did the thing that I think people fall into the trap of, where they take something as a very personal story that is actually about policy. And so they're like, I, wasn't able to have a vaginal delivery. No, that had nothing to do with you. That was hospital policy. And I'm sitting here saying, oh my God, I took the power back into my own hands. No, I didn't. The I had hospital policy that supported that kind of a birth, and I had a midwife that was willing to back me by standing by my hospital bed, and I had my doula there. Like that had nothing to do with me. And thank you for saying that, because this is so often why we struggle, I think, to make change around women's rights, is that we personalize things that are really about policy. And then it can be very hard to see that the policy needs to change because you're interpreting it as your own success or your own failing.
Yeah, it's very
Rant over.
situational. Yeah, I mean, it's very situational and it's very, dependent on, even the same provider can give different care depending on that day. And it's, we are human. We are,
Mhm.
changing and switching. We're dependent on like our physical circumstances. So it's like, that provider could even be like, "Yeah, you know what? I had a long day already. Let's wrap this up," like whatever it might be. And it's like, we do have so many different things that are being incorporated into this like big picture of each of our individual birth experiences, but there's so much going on, and that's why like it's hard to promise that a birth is going to be a specific way, or like things are going to turn out this way. And obviously, her home birth, you're limiting those factors. You know exactly who's going to be present, and about how things are going to like be situated in different circumstances. But when you're having a hospital birth, you most likely don't know which OB or midwife is going to be available. You don't know what nurses are going to be available. You've probably never met those nurses before. You don't know, anesthesiologists or what the
Mhm.
OR situation is going to be like. There's just so many factors at play. And so, yeah, it's, I think one of those things, like you said, like, it's like people take it personal, like, oh, I couldn't do this or I wasn't able to have that. But there's just so much to
There's
it.
so much out of our control. It really is
Yeah.
so much out of our control. And yeah, whenever people ask me my advice about being pregnant or birth, I will only say one thing, and that's hire a doula. That's it.
Yeah.
Just get a doula. That's like the
Yeah.
only advice I can give. I can't say anything more than that. Like
Yeah.
the science backs it up, and that's all that I can say because it's like that's truly the only variable you can control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. So how was your second born then?
So yeah, my second, at that time, I think I probably would have wanted to have another hospital birth, but my midwife had retired. So she was no longer, didn't have hospital privileges. And I only wanted to have it with her. I wanted that same exact experience. I wanted to go back to the hospital with all the same people. And just like you're saying, I wanted to know who was going to be there. But she had retired. With my first was actually one of the last that she did. And so I opted to stick with that midwifery practice because that's where I felt safe and to try to have a home birth. It ended up being, well, I won't even get into sort of the sort of medical stuff or the ways that we understand hypertension and pregnancy. I mean, there's so much data around this. Again, I'm a science journalist. I spent so many hours researching sort of every element of not only what was happening when I was pregnant, but also organ law and policy. And my midwife was so incredibly patient with me that she understood if we were going to talk about something, I would need to have stats and I would need to have recent stats. And I would probably want to see a link to the stats. Like I don't really, I think my biggest red flag was that doctors say, oh, if you like go over this one, when you go from week 40 to week 41, that your risk of having a stillborn baby doubles. But it doubles from like a non-existent percentage to like a barely existent percentage. Super important, super relevant, absolutely. But like that's the information I need to make my decision,
Mhm.
not that it doubles. And induction comes with all of its own risks and I have lived them and all of its own situations and I have lived them. I know I'm now just like I'm preaching to the choir. I know, but like the way that we date, how babies and how pregnant you are is not always even that reliable. And so your baby just may not be fully cooked yet. So my midwife was very patient with me because she really knew that I needed to make my own decisions and I needed to see the data myself. I did not want to be told what to do, and that wasn't her method anyways. And so we had a talk maybe like 2 days before the end of my 42nd week. And she was like, your blood pressure's been creeping up. We've been having trouble getting the readings. This might be a moment to just decide to go to the hospital. But if you go to the hospital, you might get flagged as high risk just because of your blood pressure that they would flag as preeclampsia, even though you don't have preeclampsia. We had done that. There's a 24-hour urinalysis you can do to see if you actually have preeclampsia. And that's the kind of thing that makes me sort of infuriated on behalf of pregnant women is that like I would have to make a choice like that. I think at that point, if I could have just gone into the hospital as a regular risk birth, I would have done that. But I didn't want to go in as a high risk birth. And I didn't want to be treated that way when I knew I didn't have preeclampsia. If I'd had preeclampsia, great. But I knew that I didn't. And this idea that like, yeah, but they won't consider your actual preeclampsia results. You just get lumped in with this larger group. I think it really upset me. So I said, I think what are the risks of just sticking this out as a home birth? And she said the risks are that in Oregon, if you get too high blood pressure readings, you have to get transferred to a hospital legally. And the other, the big risk. And I was like, what's like kind of the worst case scenario? What's like the big risk? And she said the big risk is that, hypertension it can be an indicator of placental abruption. And placental abruption is when your placenta detaches from your uterine wall and you have, minutes to get she said at that point you want to be at a hospital. The only place you want to be, the last place you want to be is home. It's like, okay, and I said, what are the chances of that happening? I think at that time she said, oh, there's like it's like a 1% chance of that happening or something. There was some, she gave me the percentage, whatever it was. And I really sat on it and I said, no, let's try to have a home birth. And I ended up taking castor oil. I went and got acupuncture. I went into labor the next day and I had a pretty wild birth. I was, sitting at 5:30. I was watching reality TV. I was feeling a little buzzy, a little crampy. And I was holding a baby at 7:20. Like it was a less than 2 hour birth from like chilling, watching reality TV, nothing, not in labor, no problems. And so the midwives, of course, barely made it. The doula barely made it. And I went from 4 centimeters to 10 centimeters in like the space of 19 minutes. It was a real high drama birth. But part of what happened is that I was losing a ton of blood from sort of right that 5:35 mark all the way through. And so they were concerned that I was having a placental abruption, and they halfway through the birth tried to transfer me to a hospital, and all the hospitals were on divert. They had trouble finding me a hospital bed, and then I ended up having the baby before we could get out the door. And it was an experience for me that, and I always I felt always reluctant talking about this because such a intense experience could of course color someone's perspective of home birth or hospital birth or whatever. But I also don't always love that it feels like the home birth community really struggles with negative stories. And I don't believe that that sort of advocacy of something means that you can only sugarcoat it. But yeah, for me, they ended up, the midwife checked me. She said, "You have 4 centimeters." She said, it's time to go to the hospital. And I said, "You think I'm having a placental abruption, don't you?" And because we had just had, we just had this conversation, and she looked at me and she said, "That is my concern." And in my mind, I knew like, oh my gosh, my chances of surviving this are very low. Obviously, you can have partial abruption. There's a lot more to it. But I understood that I was in a really sort of life or death scenario. And I'm to be perfectly honest, I felt so stupid for having a home birth. I felt really stupid for not being at the hospital. I felt in me like, oh, Emma, I had a voice in my head that said, if you die and leave your kid without a, God, like this was not worth it. And that was a really, really difficult moment. I felt in that moment just pure responsibility for the decision. Yeah. And it was terrifying. And then, whatever. 24 minutes later, I was holding a baby. It was a really surreal experience. I think we got up to get into the car and I said, I'm feeling weird. I feel like I might need to push. And the doula said, come back, check her again. And she checked again and said, okay, now you're at 9 centimeters, and we're having this baby like right now. And then like 8 minutes later, I had my baby. And yeah, I guess a perfect counter to my first story, that the first story gave me this illusion of sort of control or valor or something. We can save the day. And my second birth reminded me that we are not in control. We are not in control. And it is a life and death continuum. And that was that was the lesson for me.
Yeah. There's so much there, and how much of your, real life experience and the research that you were doing and the information that you were collecting went into your novel? Like how much of that really shaped the experience that the woman in the book has?
Yeah, I would say in that way around being pregnant and birth, very little. I made a real intentional choice to not have her be like, and I'm choosing a home birth or a hospital birth or that's not, again, like I always come back to like a pretty profound compassion for any pregnant person and whatever they choose, and that everyone's just making the best choice in like the context of their lives and their childhoods and and their experiences. So for me, I think it really was that, yeah, I had that moment sort of right before about 6 months before I sold my book. And so that birth definitely informed the way that without sort of giving away spoilers, but the way that I wrote the book, in the sense of a real brutal, primal element to motherhood. That it's not about being sweet or kind, that it is truly about risking your life to bring new life into the world. It's primal, it's fundamental. It's not sentimental, it's not emotional. It's not, of course it is very emotional, but it's not, it was a type of talking about birth and motherhood I have not really heard. No one had really talked to me about. It was always sort of like in the candles and the connection and the intimacy and the love. And this was like, holy crap, this felt like a situation sort of beyond incense for me. So I really tried to reflect that in the book.
What else would you want somebody who is maybe currently pregnant or newly postpartum to know? Just, it doesn't have to be, related to the book or anything, but just like in life in general and like your experience and your motherhood journey, do you try to just emulate and talk about more often?
I think a lot. I think we're talking a lot about how hard motherhood is lately, and I really appreciate that and respect that. But for me, when I was pregnant, I got so much of that. I got a lot of that. I'm like, it's okay if you don't love your kid at first. It's okay if your kid sucks. It's okay if you hate being a mom, which is all true and reasonable. But one time when I was very pregnant and I asked this woman, like, what advice would you give me? She had like a 2 or 3 year old. And she said, oh, Emma, it's like a love affair. She said, I'm in a love affair with this child. And it really, yeah, it stuck with me. Oh my God, it stuck with me. And it's been very true for me. It's the most intense love affair. And yeah, of course, sometimes it's hard and sometimes I don't love it. And yeah, I tried to talk about these sort of incredible, exciting, intense joyfulness of having kids and of being a parent. I mean, it really is like a love affair I've never experienced before in my life. And I would say that is true too. Even, yes, things are hard. And yes, it can be a really intense, magical love affair.
Amazing. How can we reach you, get in contact with you? Where can we find the book? Tell us all the information.
Yeah, so my book called Tilt. You can buy it anywhere the books are sold. And you can find me on Instagram at Emma Pattee. And also I'm on Substack.
Awesome. Well, this has been such an enjoyable conversation. I feel like we could talk forever and just hearing, your birth experiences and your motherhood journey and the work that you've done and everything that goes into that. It's really awesome and intriguing to just listen to you speak.
Thank you. It's just like so cool, Sarah. I don't know that I am. I don't know. Nobody asks. I do a lot of podcasts and they're just all usually about writing and or climate change. And I just really don't get to talk about this stuff very much. And yeah, so it's a real, real pleasure.
Very awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you, mamas, so much for listening. Remember, you are a rock star. I believe in you. Let's doula this. Let's crank it up a notch and let's kick it into high gear together. Hit that subscribe button, share this episode with a friend, message me, email me, call me, beat me. You know how to reach me. We're doing this, mamas. I am so excited to catch you here next week. This is your one-stop go-to place for helping you find the resources you need to make the best choices for you and your family during pregnancy, birth, and most importantly, postpartum. See you later, mamas.